This is a painting at Makatawa, which is a very favorite painting. In fact, this is the one that when I was in the Academy Julian in Paris, I told the students that he just sold this painting. He got a big...
And we're good to go anytime.
Anytime?
Yep.
Okay. This is a favorite painting of my family at Lake Makatawa. Start over.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that.
This is God, I hope it goes better than this. This is a painting of my family at Lake Makatawa at a picnic. And this is where I can see how he caught the motion of people. Because I can look at everybody and know who they are. And this is my mother in the red coat and the leggings. This is Ella in the leggings. And you can see they both have the black leggings on. This is Viola, the one that was the youngest, and my grandmother, Bertha. And this is his brother, John, who was a car.
Streetcar?
What?
Streetcar?
Streetcar, and these are the keys. And I never saw my grandfather with a set of keys like that. He had a gold watch he was very partial to, but also he's lighting a cigarette, and he never smoked a cigarette. So I'm sure that's John, and he's painting the whole family, and I can just tell by the pastor who's who. This is Julia, her twin sister, who was not identical. But everybody's kind of informed because my mother's being independent, and Ella's managing things, and Grammy's busy with Viola, with the baby. But they frequented picnics at Lake Michigan. They loved to go to Lake Michigan. And sometimes they wouldn't get there because he would stop along the way because there was a painting. And everybody seemed to understand that. Mother never acted like that was a problem because I guess they knew that's how he earned his living, and they just would have their picnic wherever this spot was that he liked. So, and I also want to say that I'm on Lake Michigan because of him, because he gave as a wedding present to my parents a lot on Lake Michigan when they got married in like about 1924, and that was the Depression coming up. Actually, 1924, the Depression came up in 1929, so they were not able to build till I was 12 years old, but that was a favorite spot. And when it was about to fall in the lake, I had to give it up, and then I was without Lake Michigan for 20 years, and I felt like I had a black hole in my soul. And I didn't realize how much it meant to me. And so when an opportunity came to get another place where I am now, whatever sacrifice was necessary, I knew it would be worthwhile. Although I had just retired and I wasn't sure how the money was going to work out, but it did. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
Good. All right, now be careful when we get...
This is a favorite portrait of my grandfather because this is how I remember him. I hate to say it, but he always had a cigar in his mouth at the end. And of course, they didn't know about the danger of smoking, but if he didn't have it lit, he'd have it in his mouth. And I guess we were all used to that, but there was a cigar company, Van Dam Brothers, right down on Fulton Street that was close by, and that was one of the things he enjoyed. This is just a year before he died, and it's in the studio at 1593 East Fulton, and you can see the window behind him, the north window, which he had put in the room when it was going to be his studio, because there wasn't a north window, and he always wanted that for the light. the paintings are the same that are in the pictures of the, what do you call Allison, that you did the study?
Oh, the timeline?
The what?
The timeline?
Yeah, the timeline.
Yeah, the paintbrushes?
Yes, these are the same paintbrushes, I know, that, and they look the same. But this is my grandfather.
Do you want to talk about his pocket chain?
Oh, yeah. This, he had a favorite gold watch, and this is the chain for that gold watch. He cherished that, and actually it was given to my cousin Alten when he died. One of his favorite possessions.
You want to talk about how you have that palette as well, and unfortunately...
I don't have that. I had a metal one.
But it's been scrubbed clean, hasn't it?
Oh, well, the one I gave to Grand Valley was, I think, a metal one, was in my basement. But I don't know. This one, Anita may have. I don't know.
Maybe hope yet then.
Never know.
We want the paint splattered one.
Right.
I know, because, all right, and this is how you can see he did his paints. He had tubes, and he'd squirt out paint and then mix it till it got the right shade that he wanted. When he was in Germany and apprenticing with that Joseph Klein, he was very good at mixing paintings, and I think they did their own. But when he got here, they all had these metal tubes that he squeezed it out of. And just knew till he got the right shade. And that was where he was very skilled at that. People would ask how he did it. But that's at 1593 East Fulton in the studio with his north window.
Good northern light audio.
This is a thing that he would flatten when there would be big blobs of paint that he would have, and that's some kind of tool that you used to do that.
Okay, don't move until I unplug you here. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
Okay. This is in Taos, New Mexico, and Taos was one of the places he loved to paint because the sky was so blue. After he came back from Spain and started painting the lighter colors. And the Indians were very willing to be models. They knew there was an artist that was painting, and they would be paid. So he didn't have to convince them, but they would wear all different color shirts because they knew the artist had a preference for certain colors. So they'd layer their clothes and have maybe 6 shirts on, and take one off and another one and say, is this okay? Until he got one that he liked. And that is a pretty color. But he painted there for quite a while. This is another artist colony where they were collected. And it was Irving House, where he was an artist friend that was one of the main 7 artists of Taos that were famous. And had he known to belong to them, I've had people that know tell me that he could have, and he would, business-wise, would have done much better, but he was not particularly sharp at business. So
Do you want to comment on the horses at all? Because he was
I don't
so-
know, they all had ponies, but, or horses. And evidently he's waiting with the other horse for some other rider, friend of his, and that's why they're standing there probably. Although they could have been posed by my grandfather.
It's a good thing he was a quick painter.
He
too.
was so fast, and he always was very rapid. And if it wasn't going right, he'd just wipe it off. He didn't fool around with trying to fix something up. But that may be why he painted so many paintings, because he, has been documented at this point 2,000. I'm sure there's another 1,000 out there somewhere that we don't know about.
All right, let me unplug you.
My mother, Camelia, and she was the second daughter of Mathias Alten and Bertha. And as usual, he chose the outfit, the material. He probably brought that material back from Europe. And the girls made the dresses. And she has, I see something in her hair also. But you can see the skin, the delicate that he liked to do. And it was, this was like 2 years after they were married, so it would have been like 1926 or before I was born. No, I was born in 1925. How could that be? Is there a date on that? I guess there isn't.
Well, we don't have the day with us.
Okay,
We'll look it up.
but someone told me it was 2 years after they were married. She's very arrogant here, and he picks that up. And of all the daughters, she probably was the most daredevil and loved adventure. She rode down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon on a mule when she was 19 years old, taking a trip out west with her friend, Hannah, 2 girls, unheard of in that day and age, and were visiting my Uncle Frank when they got to Los Angeles. And he was the youngest brother of my grandmother, Bertha, that lived with them when he was raised because his father died when he was like 8 years old. So this portrays Mother. I get the feeling of her just looking at it. Okay.
Did you want to talk about the decision to donate them?
What?
Do you want to talk about your decision to donate them to?
Oh, yeah, I
Grand
forgot
Valley?
that. Thank you. When I inherited these, at the time that my father died, they had most of their things up north at that point in Nobbinway. And they knew he was going to die too, so they had a lot of decisions to make. And I got both of the portraits, which I treasured, but I thought it isn't good to have them all in one place where nobody can see them. And so that was when I was inspired to give the first gift to Grand Valley with the idea that students could study them and learn art. And my family, extended family, could see them at their liberty when it was convenient, because they would be placed in a public spot, which my grandfather loved to have his paintings where they could be seen. So that was my decision. That was the first ones that were a gift.
Gloria, can I ask you, my memory is a little different from what you told me.
Okay.
My memory is that you had all your children and it wasn't clear who should get the grandparents' portrait, that you thought that to be fair, they should go to a public institution rather than with any
That's
one
true. It was
particular
at the time we
family.
divided all the paintings.
Right,
And
and so who gets grandma and
Yeah.
grandpa? And you thought, well, the fair way to do it is to give it to a public institution and everybody gets it, they can come and look at them at any time. Does that sound right?
yeah,
or-
that's right. See, I get mixed up.
Okay.
But, yeah, so the idea was to be fair. And I don't know why I got them, actually, but anyway. I'm sure they were divided up. And then, see, that's where I got mixed up, because they were divided up when my dad was dying, and they had to make all these decisions. And then when we received them is when I thought, I had just read an article about Picasso, and that his relatives couldn't afford to inherit his paintings. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I did a thing over a 10-year period to divide the paintings between my children. They came over and we did a 1, 2, 3, 4 and took turns. And that went very well. So, but I did take these out because it didn't seem right to have one person have these. So that's when I decided to give them to Grand Valley.
Now, if we're just gonna, I'm gonna lift this wire, we're gonna just turn you to face the other one. Turn
Okay.
the chair a little bit so that you can face, you can still sit and face.
Okay.
Can you see that one? You tell us, we can turn it more.
Yeah, I
pull
need-
it out.
With hot lights,
What?
with the hot lights, just take it, like,
Oh.
just dab, just right around your nose on the side there.
Okay,
There you go.
okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And if you
Let me
want
get up
to,
a
you
little
pull
bit.
it where you want it, okay?
You want it closer to the thing?
A little closer this way,
Like that way?
That should be good.
Okay.
okay? And
Now let's see.
if you,
There you
we can turn it out a little bit more if you want to see the painting better.
Okay,
How's that?
yeah.
And then I'm gonna fix your wire again.
And maybe on this one, Gloria, you could talk a little bit how it seems stiffer
Yeah,
than the other one, and it's probably because you didn't know him as well yet.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously knew his daughter in a whole different way.
yes.
All right, I'm gonna tuck this inside again a little bit. There, that's better, I think. I still got the microphone. There we go. Okay.
Is that all right?
Yep, except now I gotta fix the wire one more time. That's okay, that's all right. Yeah, oh yeah, let me put it behind your feet, that's a great idea. Okay, that's better. And then I'm just gonna tuck that back in there a little bit. Okay.
Okay. All right, so
It's a
now we're going to
beautiful-
talk a little bit about who this is and why he's a little stiffer
Mm-hmm.
than the portrait of your mother.
This is my father, Ralph W. Demon, who was an architect, graduated from University of Michigan, and who initially wanted to be a fruit farmer, but my mother didn't want to marry a fruit farmer, so he went to school to be an architect. He's a little stiff because probably my grandfather didn't know him as well. I had him as a father.
Gloria, maybe talk a little bit about his work in the city.
Oh, yeah.
And also his work of the jewelry.
Yes, very good. After my father was an architect who did like 200 houses in and around Grand Rapids, which are done by hand, so they're really works of art, no computer involved. And they now are in the public museum so that they can be saved for people to study. You have to make an appointment, but hopefully, I heard that Grand Valley was going to have a school of architecture at some point. I don't know, but anyway, they would be accessible to young students that wanted to go there and study the plans. And then when they retired in Florida, in Longboat Key, where I go now to winter, he set up a little studio in their little villa in the wash area with a soldering iron and all the things he needed to make jewelry. And this jewelry is something he made. This is difficult with a chain. This is melted silver that people would give him because they knew he made jewelry. And again, was the pattern with the family that they'd have open houses on Sunday afternoon where people could come and see the latest thing that Ralph did with his jewelry. My mother made a wonderful coffee cake that I need to get the recipe for. I forgot about that. But they'd have tea and coffee cake and look at the different things. And what the silver market was depended a lot on what he was doing. And he did do stuff, jewelry with actual stones. And he started out having stones that he baked in an oven, or what do you call that? What?
Kiln?
Yeah, in a kiln. And then he went to actual stones, and everybody in the family has some, and I have a great deal. And I don't, I don't wear them enough, and then I decided to wear these today. But he made the earrings and the jewelry, and the chains are particularly difficult.
Why don't you mention that you've also donated all of those?
What?
You've donated all jewelry as well.
That's right, to the public museum. Thank you.
Start again, so I donated.
The public museum also has a collection of his jewelry, which Seeley, what's her name? Beverly Seeley had appraised everything before it went there. And they have a wonderful display, which has never been displayed, which is too bad. But things that I end up being the caretaker, it seems like, of the family treasures, including my mother, who lived with us for 4 years before she went to a retirement home. And that's where a lot of my information comes from, her talk. She loved telling stories, and she was a great storyteller. When she got to the retirement home, she'd go to the coffee shop every afternoon, and the people would say, "Tell the one about the circus." Well, she said she was mad at something at home. She was going to run away from home. And so they were advertising for a lady on the trapeze to hang by her teeth. So she went down and applied, and the Grammy had to go down and get her, bring her home.
Great stuff.
I never heard this.
That's a good one, yeah.
That's when I realized what Grammy had, the responsibility of raising those children while he was out of town.
There's one more story I want you to tell. That's that he was the architect for the Veterans Square. That's
Yes,
the
right.
memorial. Yeah, because I think that's probably the best known thing
Yes.
that he did.
That his office was when he first came back to Grand Rapids from Ann Arbor. He worked for the city of Ann Arbor for 1 year, and then he came back here when they were married, and Osgood and Osgood was an architectural firm that was right on the top of where the Children's Museum is now. And you could look out and see the Veterans Memorial Park from that view. And he was assigned to do the Veterans Memorial for World War I veterans. And they had a pond there. It was very nice. It's right in front of Park Church, and anyway, they do weddings there now, I guess. But that was his assignment. And when he died, it said, "Pythons of the Park designer dies." And he would have not liked that to be his obituary, because he designed many wonderful things, and that was like an Egyptian python. It was really, but they have all the names of the World War II veterans on it.
Okay, do you want to do the one behind that now and then break?
I was going to say that these could be the last two for today, unless
Okay.
you wanted to do one more,
Since we're all set
the
up.
oxen
Okay.
driver and bull at Kavanaugh. I think
Okay.
was one of the other ones. And we can move this out of the way.
You
Or
could-
we
you-
can just stop for today and start up
It's
tomorrow.
up to you.
Well, I can do the two.
Do one.
Okay. You can just sit there
All
for a
right.
minute while we rearrange things. Okay. You tell me what to do or not
You
to
can
do.
hold on to the side of the painting for a
Okay.
minute.
Yeah. Imagine creating all those paintings and sending them to all these galleries all over the town.
Imagine.
This is Cabanyal in Spain, and this is where they, what did they do in Spain?
The oxen, you mean?
The oxen, but what kind of
Oh,
fish?
the fish,
Herring?
Sardines.
Sardines, yeah, right.
Okay.
Spain for sardines.
Yep.
This is where they went out and did sardines, caught sardines in nets and used the oxen. And this is where he changed because of the bright sunlight in Sorolla that was also influenced him. He had seen an exhibit of Sorolla in New York. He never did meet Sorolla, which some accounts say, but he never did meet him, but he was very influenced by him. And the bull keeper would sit on the yoke of the oxen, and he has a stick there that has a point on the end of it, and he'd prod the oxen with a stick, which my grandfather didn't like because he thought it was cruel, but he was sensitive about all those things. While he was there, someone talked him into going to a bullfight, and he said he couldn't get out of there fast enough. It was so barbaric. So that's another example. But all of these people had to agree to let him paint them so that the oxen would sink into the sand and the sails would be going every which way. And then later, like a boat way out there on the horizon, someone would come in and say, "That's me, I want to be paid." And it was difficult painting there, but he was known for his Spanish paintings, and they were wonderful. But he did everything on site. He never did anything different. I think this could be the painting that when I graduated, or when I was teaching my first year, that I needed a car, and I agreed to sell a painting to get the car. It was very similar to this, with a huge sail and the 2 oxen. And you can see what hard work that was. He really liked painting a common person, the work person. Someone wanted to have him paint a racehorse, and he was not interested in that. He liked the more, I don't know what kind of scenes.
The working man.
Work animals.
More what?
Work animals.
Word animals, yes, that show their muscles and structure, and that was very important for him to get that right. Okay.
Okay, now stay still because we got wires there. I don't want you.
This is a spring landscape that reminds me of what my grandfather described as the Mosul Valley, where his father had a vineyard and was the wine steward to the Bishop of Trier. And this reminds her of her country, and you can tell it's spring when he loved those light green colors when they first came out. You see those in the birch paintings too. I think that's it.
Do you know where in Grand Rapids or where in Michigan he painted that?
I don't know.
Because I wondered if that was near the farm property that the home was on?
The what?
The farm where the home was on, all that acreage, was it
No,
near
that wasn't
No?
where it was. No,
Okay.
they just had 3.5 acres, and there was
Okay.
no stream.
All right.
But his mother was named Maria. Okay, can we go to? Okay, this is the bayou at North Park, and he seemed to love painting at North Park. He did a lot of paintings there. But then he would be upset when it would flood, because oftentimes in the spring he would have where he couldn't get out there to paint because of the water flooding. But I remember, I knew that was North Park before I even looked at the name of the picture, so.
Where is North Park? Is
It's-
that East Grand Rapids?
It's north, really. Well, north
Okay.
Park. It's where they have a good pizza place.
Oh, okay, out like the Beltline Lane? Out-
No, you go out, actually from your house, you go out, what? What?
Fricano's?
Fricano's, that's a wonderful pizza
So
place.
it's
So
out
they
that
have
way?
that in Grand Haven too. Yeah, and you go from where the veterans, it's near the veterans,
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
and it's on this side of the river, although you can go on the other side of the river. I think it's North Park too.
yeah. Yeah, so that's just down North Monroe.
Yes, North Monroe, that's
But
it.
of course, in those days, it would have been out of town, quite a bit out
Yes,
of
it
town.
would be in the
Yeah,
country.
Today it's all suburbia and city.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, let me
I wanted
Okay, this is Tarpon Springs, and it was painted in 1935, which was about 3 years before he died. And another colony where artists would go because it was so colorful. The boats were the Greek fishermen that came over from Greece, and this is what they did in Greece. So they just continued that on in this country. And those sponges are live, of course, and one time when he came home, well, 35, I would have been 10 years old, and he had all these on a string, and it was so exciting when he would come home, because those are the things I remember, the trips leaving and coming and all the excitement of what he would bring, and everybody had these sponges, and it was just a good time. These are hard to paint because the boats move, and anything that is not in a regular setting is more difficult, and he seemed to choose that all the time with the oxen in Holland and the horses. No, the oxen were in Spain and the horses were in the Netherlands, always with boats and animals and things moving, which was a real challenge. And because he painted so rapidly, he was able to do that. If you were precise and taking a lot of time, the boat would have been in a different place by the time you got ready to look again. So he prided himself in being able to do that. And this again is a whole group of paintings that he did in Tarpon Springs. And I think that he would stay home when the country was in Europe was in some form of distress because there was a war or they were recovering from a war. That seemed to dominate when he went traveling, almost like it is today when it's safe to go different places.
Okay, here, hold still, just from these lights.
This is another spot where artists liked to gather. They would have artist colonies here. And my Uncle Frank lived here, which was the youngest of the family in terms of the child that was born when his father died and my grandmother came to live with my Bertha and Matthias. And so he went out here often. Well, actually 3 times to paint, but because my Uncle Frank was there, they owned a lemon grove, which was quite popular at that time. And she was from Minneapolis, Aunt Emma, and they had adopted a child, Billy, because they could not have children. And they moved to California so that no one would know that he's adopted. I hope he knows it now. And I have a wonderful recipe for lemon meringue pie that comes from that lemon grove. So when I lived in Redlands, California, they came to visit, and then when my parents were there, and then we went to visit them in the lemon grove. And my aunt went out there to visit Aunt Em at one point, and she's writing letters back. It was when my cousins were very small, like a baby and 3 years old. And grandmother is writing that she thinks she should come home, and grandfather is saying you can go back another time. But the children miss you. So she came home But that's when I realized how much of a responsibility my grandmother had to be taking care of the little children and the house and everything that goes with it at her age. And I really have a new appreciation for what it meant for her to be there in that blended family again. Okay?
Okay.
So, I'm just to clarify, so Uncle Frank, that was,
The youngest,
on Bertha's, so Bertha's brother.
Bertha's brother,
Right.
yeah.
And then the letter was to your
to
Aunt Eleanor.
Eleanor,
Yep.
yeah. And she used the excuse to go out there to sell paintings, but I think she wanted to escape. You know, she was divorced, which was unheard of back then. And
Freer,
Yeah, she got to,
makes sense.
yeah,
what?
she got to go and do what she wanted for a
Yeah,
while.
exactly.
Beautiful
She was
California.
escaping,
Yeah.
no question. But, you know, she was Anita's mother, so that also is a part of this story. But, and Anita's just like her, really.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope you don't have that.
And they say the apple doesn't fall ready when you are.
Okay, this is the Rancho de Taos where I visited, and it's another place where the artists congregate and had an artist colony. It's in Taos, New Mexico, where he loved to paint because of the bright light and the blue skies. And there's a figure going in, I think as a nun. I took a trip to see that with a friend, and we missed the turn. So we ended up in a beautiful place, a gorge, but we never did get there. We went to a lot of places around there. That was another idea that I had, to visit where he had painted. I think now I had a bucket list as I think back, because I seem to want to go to all these places where he was. I think that's,
Okay, did you want to do this about?
yeah.
Do you want to stay right
Yeah,
there?
I could.
Or do you want to change it? Okay. Do you want, I can hold your stick if that's awkward for you to
No,
hold both?
is that okay?
All right, let's see if
That
we
look
can
all
get
right?
in closer on that and maybe do like a zoom out or something, or is that too?
And Gloria, you might say when you're done, you're looking forward to the new book that's going to be coming
Oh,
out.
good, okay.
Yeah,
next
actually,
year.
yeah.
You know, that
That
way-
you're putting out, though,
Yeah.
not
Grand
Grant.
Valley is putting out.
Yeah.
Right. This is Grant's book.
Yeah, yeah.
But we can say, you know, I'm looking forward
Okay.
to the next.
Wonderful book that's
Yeah.
coming out.
Right, we'll see what it is.
Okay. I like this picture because it's called The Last Load, and it turns out that a classmate of mine from the class of 43 at Central High School, Catherine Locke, told me that this is her uncle, and her uncle is Ploon Locke, and this is a farm on the corner of Forest Hills Road or Forest Hills Avenue and Ada Drive. And this farmhouse is still there behind the church. It's a kind of a white house, but it's been there forever. And this is typical where he would go out and just see what was available to paint. Every morning he'd take his sketch box and walk around. So a lot of the area around Grand Rapids is where he painted. Oh, I forgot the thing. Can I say it now? Yeah. We're going to have a book coming out from Grand Valley soon that's going to be wonderful. A new book that will be like a hardcover with a coffee table type. And it's going to have all of the more recent acquisitions that Grand Valley has. And it's going to be very exciting. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Very
great,
good.
thank you.
Okay. Oh, don't worry about it.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. I love the pictures that have the chickens or the ducks, which he loved to paint, and were very difficult because they move all the time, and other artists would admire the fact that he could do that. When you think about it, there's the oxen and the horses and chickens and ducks. The Gordons have a duck picture that I had, and it looks good on any kind of wallpaper. It's amazing. But to capture the movement and the feel is what he did well.
You also were talking about how he had chickens, but he didn't want to.
Oh, good, thank you. That's right, that's the reason I'm talking about this.
Maybe you could look toward the camera a little bit when you
Yeah,
talk
okay.
about that.
When they moved at the 1593 East Fulton, it was a farm. It was the end of the streetcar, which he liked because he could take the streetcar downtown. But it was 3.5 acre farm, so they decided they could have chickens, raise chickens. So they bought all these chickens, and it turned out that he couldn't bear to kill them. So they had to hire the butcher from Fulton Heights Market to come up to kill the chickens. So they decided that wasn't a very profitable venture, so they discontinued the chickens. But that's another example of he couldn't be cruel to animals.
That's a great, when you're ready.
All right. This is a picture of a nude that was painted upstairs on 1593 East Fulton in my grandparents' bedroom, which is on the east side and got the east light, which she wanted. It was the morning light. And the hyacinth, of course, my grandmother raised all the flowers that he painted in her garden. And he was adamant that it was very important to be able to paint the nude figure. He learned that from when he was at the Julian Academy, and all of the teachers there felt that that was the way to master the human figure, and he was very good at that. I am just amazed at how I can look at something and know who it is. You'd think that he used to sketch people walking, and you could tell that he would just practice and practice. And he said it took 15 to 20 years for an artist to be able to paint the nude model. And when he was in Paris, the teachers were so adamant that that was the right thing to do, that they wouldn't judge another portrait that was done without being nude, because it was just a totally different experience. And it was very difficult, evidently, for an artist to get the skin tones and the colors just right, and the shades, different shades. That's the reason that it was so important to master that. But my grandmother would make lunch, and so I was 11 years old when this was painted, and I remember eating lunch with her. I had no idea that he was painting her nude upstairs, but he never changed his mind. He said if you have the nude draped, the material changes and doesn't stay the same, and that once he was asked what his advice was to a young person that was interested in being an artist, and he said, if you can conquer the human figure, the nude model, you can paint anything. And just go ahead and do your best, and however it comes out, it'll be better than if you hadn't tried.
Right.
So I think that's it.
Do you want to talk about, remember where he had the students and the way that he was really strict about
Oh,
the
yeah.
nudes coming, the models coming in and
Oh,
leaving and no
good.
talking and.
Yes. He got a lot of criticism in Grand Rapids because they knew he had classes downtown in his studio, which were different places, but they were criticizing because they knew he had a nude model. So they sent social workers up to see how they were treating the model, and he said the model is treated better than in a Sunday school class. He said, if you had to stand in bright lights in the same posture for 45 minutes while somebody paints you, and you have to watch because they can faint at any time. And if people think that's immoral, they don't know what they're talking about, because if you want to be immoral, there's a lot easier ways to do it than that.
And then also, didn't he, maybe you can talk about how he let the models leave
Oh, right, good.
ahead of.
He was very particular in his classes. He was very strict and quiet, and there was no talking. And he always left the model go earlier so that nobody could have any interchange with her as she left. She got dressed and left before any of the other students could leave. So he was particular.
All right, that's good. Okay.
I know it's there.
You
so-
want to tilt your chair, turn it a little bit? Turn
I don't
this way
wanna-
slightly? Oh, don't. Okay, so you can see it? Can you see it better now?
Yeah. But then are you okay? This is oh, Henry, here's that word. Tell me how to say that.
Scheveningen.
Shaven.
It's Scheveningen. Scheveningen.
Shaven.
That's the beach near Amsterdam.
Or near on the North
Okay.
Sea? Do you want
Beach on the North Sea is fine.
This again is the North Sea in Scheveningen, where he painted. They lived in the new Scheveningen, and he painted the people fishing, and this is a clam digger. And he, I'm sure, liked the red shirt. At least a lot of the colors there were very subdued in the North Sea with the fog and so forth, and the blues and the browns. But what else was I going to talk
You were
about?
going to talk about the tubes?
Oh, yeah.
It was so cold.
When he would go out, the paint was in tubes, and it would be so cold he couldn't squeeze out the paint. So he had a little kerosene lamp on his sketch box that he would light to warm up so he could get the paint out of the tubes. So all of these places were very difficult to paint, but he was determined. He loved to do this, and you can see the colors that are not as bright as when he later painted in the blue skies and the sunshine. And this was probably, the Netherlands was the last time he painted in the dark colors. But he was there a year, and his whole family was there. And he was said to have completed 100 paintings. He painted every day, unless he went to the Louvre or some of the galleries around there. Have I forgotten something?
No,
I think
that was
that's good.
great. That was
All right,
good.
now we're going to walk over to the other page.
See, I didn't hear that.
That's all right.
I love this painting. This was my daughter Nancy's painting, and she decided she didn't have just enough tall ceilings to do this justice, so she decided to sell it. And it was right at the time that they wanted to buy a place near me on Lake Michigan, 5 steps from the back door to her back door. And so they had a mortgage on their house, and they decided they really couldn't handle another mortgage, even though both of them were working. And so she sold it, paid off the mortgage for their house, and was able to buy the condo on Lake Michigan right near me. So those kind of things happened all the time. And he, I still think he is providing for the family in a way, because he painted so ferociously and never stopped. But that is what he loved. It wasn't that he was unhappy or feeling pressure to do that. And there was no better day than when he was out painting. And a quiz that was in the paper, they said, "What is your favorite thing to do?" And he said, "Collect morel mushrooms." So, is that how you say morel?
Yeah, morels.
Morel. Okay. And what else did you tell me?
Just that, well, that it's Marsha Haas's favorite.
Oh, yeah.
We found that out. And then, I mentioned how Alton's still taking care of the
Yeah.
families.
You
You did that.
There
Do you
are,
wanna talk a
there,
little bit about
there are more Altons. One of the people that he painted with went without to California, I think was Norm Chamberlain, and he's at the foot of the tree of one of these sycamores. But this is a California sycamore that was very prevalent, and so he liked those and the branches and so forth. And I think there are a number of those too.
when you're ready, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
This is my mother Camellia at age 19, and she's holding a bouquet of delphiniums that my grandmother planted at the garden in their home at 1593 East Fulton. She always planted the flowers, had a beautiful garden so that my grandfather could go out when he wanted to do a still life and just make a subject matter that he could paint. He was always careful about models and told her that if a cloud came over, she could rest for a little bit. It took him 3 to 4 hours to do a painting, which is very fast, but he'd stick with it until it was done. And so she was looking up to see when the cloud was coming, and she fell over backwards and fainted and crushed down all the delphiniums, which, of course, he could paint as though they were standing up. But I think she had the same thing that I have, which is vasovagal syncope, which means fainting. And when you look up or you look under, the blood goes to where it shouldn't and you faint. And she had this all her life, actually. When she was in retirement home, she would talk about, I don't know what happened. I just went to sit down and I fell on the floor. And that was a concern, but nothing was diagnosed. But since I have that now, I'm pretty sure it's probably the same thing. He would choose the dress and everything always. That satin skirt could be what she was wearing when she was side saddle on the horse. When the whistle blew and the horse went crazy and down to the place where the barn was, and my grandfather chasing it down all the way down Fulton Street. But it looks very similar to what she had on. But they would make all their own clothes because a dressmaker was too expensive. So they knew how to sew. Everybody did. And Aunt Julia would come over especially when there's a deadline because something's happening. My Aunt Viola is having a concert, dancing, and so they had beautiful clothes all the time. And when I went off to college, she made my entire wardrobe all plaid skirts, pleated plaid skirts, which was the thing in those days, with saddle shoes. And she was very talented that way. She also helped my grandfather put gold on the frames that he carved. He would make hand-carved frames, and then they had to have gold leaf put on them. And it was very difficult. You can see her hands are delicate, but she was very proud of that. She was a present a lot of the times when he was working or when he would go to a gallery. She would accompany him. Did I talk about the car? The Kissel?
No, go
Okay. She also, about that time, they bought a Kissel car, and she went with him to the showroom to see what car they wanted, and he looked and said to the salesman, I like this one because I like the lines and the color. And the salesman said, well, would you like to see the motor? And I'll lift the hood. And he said, no, I don't know anything about motors. It's just that I like the color. And so then she ended up being the driver of that car, and she loved to drive. And she would take him places on Sunday to church and keep the car running because she wasn't sure she could get it started again. And she'd have to run and jump on the crank on the front of the car because that's how you got it going. Sometimes she'd park on the top of the hill at Fulton Street so she could just let the car run down the hill and get it started that way. But it was a constant thing, and they shouldn't say car because they always called it machine. It was the machine, and I don't know where that came from, but it's always the machine. So there were many adventures, and the girls at that stage would go visit relatives and so forth, and my grandmother would have to write letters and tell them that it's time to come home, because they all evidently were quite free to do things, which was unusual for that day and age. But they had